Parshas Hashem Yisborach. Yom Vi Parshas Vayechi. Nas Tovshin Ayin Vov. Shiur Tiferes Avigdor. We are, the history of the Jews is comprised of 4 eras of Galus. And we are now in the 4th Galus. It's called the Galus Roimi. Now you have to know the whole plan of the entire Bria from the beginning to the end was established by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything's in a plan. There's nothing that happens just happenstance. And everything is alluded to in the Torah, because the Torah is the map of every nivra, and every nivra's existence and life is in the Torah. So in order to understand things that happened, history of Klal Yisroel, things that happened and things that will happen, it's important to know where are they alluded to in the Torah. One of the ways that the Torah shares things with us is al yedei ma'isa avos simin labanim. That means the whole mahalach of the history of Klal Yisroel was already scripted and established through the avos of this nation. Now, let's understand this a little bit. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world for a specific purpose. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the ultimate toif. So he created people in the world in order to be meitiv with them. And in order that the hatova, the goodness that Hashem bestows is showing, Hashem put them in a zametzias. They live in the reality where there are many nisyonos. And these nisyonos hide or veil of the clarity of what the Metzias is. If a person withstands the nisyonos, he's going to be zoicha to eternal tainuk, which there's nothing compared to it. And if a person toiled to choose good, so then the hatova, the schar he gets will be shleima, and there won't be any bushim. But that's not the whole reason for the bria. There's another tachlis, and that is that the world itself comes to its tikkun al yedei, the choices that mankind makes. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a metzias called Ra in the world, which was created in order to present a person with a choice to do good or do bad. And the Metzias of Ra goes against the Ratzon Hashem, and the Tikkun of the Bria is when this Ra becomes Batel Umevuta. One of the difficulties to identify the Ra is because the Ra is mixed in with the Toif. You have to know, Ra doesn't challenge humans only under the guise of some Toif. You have to know. You look at the times, the periods of times when the Ra was Matzliach in its goals to make human beings stumble. And you'll notice that the nature of Ra, throughout history, it always appears in new garments, clean clothes. Now, there are three main Zmanim that Ra appeared, and main Zmanim, it always appears, but there are three main Zmanim that it appeared. The first time was when the Nachash came and brought Adam Arishan for the Chet. And Adam Arishan did not withstand that challenge, so it appeared a second time. When was that? It came in the time of the Erev Rav. It came in the time of the Erev Rav, and that was the Chet of the Egel. And over there, they were given the opportunity to go back to the matziv of Adam Arishan before the Chet, had they passed the challenge, like Chazal tell us. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Amra HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ta'am Yisroel, B'shitasai shel Adam Arishan halachta. You went in the sheet of Adam Arishan. You followed his footsteps. He couldn't withstand the Nisayon in the first 3 hours of its creation. Klal Yisrael couldn't withstand the Nisayon on the last day of the 40 days. And you followed his ways. And in the 9th hour was Niknesa Olav Misa on Adam Arishan. And so too, the Chet HaEgel, they were told, Achen Ka'adam Timus. The third time that the Ra appears in history with all its koyach hapitui is in the tkufa of Ikvas of the Mashiach. And this time also it appears in the form of the Erev Rav. And that's the last time that it makes an appearance with all of its koyches for the final battle. Now, we are now in the Galus HaRavius. That's where we're now. And in the Galus HaRavius, it's been a long Galus. And the Ramban says a number of things regarding the Galus HaRavius. So we're going to learn this Ramban in the beginning of this Parsha. He says like this: Redes Yankiv l'Mitzrayim. When Yankiv went down to Mitzrayim, so I already mentioned, he says, Yankiv's going down to Mitzrayim was corresponding to the Galus of the evil Romans. And we find ourselves now in that Galus. So he says, Biyad hachaya haravias roimi harishon. And he says, what's unique about it? He says, what happened to Yankiv Avinu? He says, his children themselves caused their own Yerida of going down there because they were Meicher Yosef. Second of all, he says, Yankiv went there because of the Ra'ov, because of the hunger. Third, he says, he thought he would be spared by living in the house of his son who loved him and he loved him. And Pari loved Yosef also very much, like a son to him. And he thought that when the Rav is going to leave Mitzrayim, they're going to go back. Like it says, Logur ba'aretz banu, they came here just to Logur, planning on going back. Ki ein mira l'tzoy, ki chaved a Rav be'eretz Canaan. L'mais, however, lo yalu, they didn't go up. Ela nisharu b'Galus mana, they remained in Galus for a long time. And the fourth thing he says is, he died over there, and his atzomas came up from Mitzrayim. 5. Open some of the windows. Another thing is, he says, the Ziknei Paroi and his sorrow brought him up, and they had a great mourning, V'yankev Avi. So the Ramban says that there is comparison. Then he goes on to say, V'chol zeh, all of this happened to us in the Galus of Roim and Edom. He says, first of all, our own brothers caused this Galus because they made a bris with the Romans. This was the bris that Yehuda HaMaccabi made, and Yonason was Machadish the bris. So that Shaykhis, and he says that Agrippas HaMelech, who was the last Melech in the Tkufas Bayesheni, came to assist them. He ran to them also for Ezra, and that was the beginning of the Galus of Rome. So he says that, second of all, Anshe Yerushalayim were captured because of the hunger. There was a hunger in the land. 3, he says, the Galus is much longer than we ever planned. We don't know the end. Not like other Golios that we know the end. 4th thing he says is, we're similar in our Galus to Mason. That our Atzamos are dried up and all the hope is lost. The 5th thing he says, we're going to come out from all the nation, and all the nation will offer us a Minchal Hashem with great fanfare when the Mashiach comes, and it's going to be a great morning like it was when Yankev Avinu, when they're going to see all the cover we're going to get, and we're going to see in the Nikmas Hashem, and we're not going to go in the Galus anymore. So one of the things here that the Ramban is masbir, that just like Yankev Avinu, when he came out of Israel, came out only in a matziv of Atzamos, you have to know that us also, he says, we are considered like Mason, Yovshu Atzmoiseinu, our bones have become Yavesh, and what does that mean? So the Vilna Goyen explains that in the Mahalach of Galus, it's compared to what happens to a corpse when somebody dies. We all know that when somebody dies, the corpse is tummy. Now, what happens the longer the corpse remains? It decays, and it disintegrates. You should know, in contrast to that, in accordance with that, the tumah also disintegrates. The more distant a mace goes from its chayim, the less tumah it becomes. And eventually it becomes just earth. Now, the first step, what's the beginning of the decaying process? What is step one? When the worms begin to attack the basar, and the basar and the guf has no ability to prevent this from happening. That's the first step. That's the first step of the Galus. When Klal Yisroel went into Chutz La'aretz, amongst the nations of the world, the nations ate our flesh. We couldn't save ourselves from them, just like the worms eat the basar. But we still had some chiyus, just like tumas meis, when this basar and atzamas, even if the basar is already eaten up, but the bones are still intact, there still remains tum. And that was at the time when there were chaburas of loimdei Torah and yeshivas. They were the chiyas of Klal Yisroel. They were like the atzamas. The next thing happens after the basar becomes eaten up and decayed, and there remains just atzamas. These atzamas without basar, what happens to them? They become detached from each other. And that corresponds to the closing of the yeshivas in Bavel until the end of the period in the Goyim. And there were yeshivas in Bavel, so the Gemara says, Mishkach Shchichi, people would go from all the yeshivas, all over Bavel to the yeshivas, and there was still a kesher, the atzamas still retained the shame of a skeleton instead of scattered bones. There was still atzamas. And then what happened was that atzamas became separated, the yeshivas became batal, but they remained individuals. And the third shlav step is when the atzamas themselves decay and turn into offer. And that, he says, is the era when the Talmidei Chachamim themselves, when the Goyen explains, when the Talmidei Chachamim themselves become offer. There's nothing left. What does that mean to say? In what way? How does a Talmid Chacham become offer? When his hasaga and his grasp of Torah becomes so diminished that the spitz gerit. But dafken azam in maxim zaktiv on the gain. When you get to the bones, a mamish, and all the Talmid Chacham a mamish offer, that is when the hope for tchiyas hamesim, for the geula starts. You know where it says this in the pasuk? Hisnari, wake up, arise, may offer, because we're at offer, kumi. That means the Yeshua and the Gula will come from a matzav when Klal Yisroel hits the lowest level of offer. The Vilna Goyen testified that his generation already reached the third madrega. The Vilna Goyen says we are therefore sitting and awaiting Tchiyas HaMesim. And you should know, at that point in time, it was shattered. It's amazing. A Vilna Goyen, a Chaim Volozhiner, a Rabbi Tzila Volozhiner, a Rabbi Zelma Volozhiner, a Rabbi Kiveger, a alle Rosh Yeshivas, a Chaim Moise, a Chaim Chaim, das ist schon gewesen. And then, who took over and became in charge? The HaRav. The HaRav. That you have to know. Now, to give you a little what it means, Hasaga, the Vilna Gaon said as follows about himself. I have some Hasaga in the Galus of the Rishonim. I even have some Hasaga in the Galus of the Goyim, which is the period before that. I even have some Hasaga in the Galus of the era before that, Rabbanon Savaroi. He says, and even the Maroyim and the Tanoim, it's shaykh to get to that Madrig we can understand. But on one thing, he has no hasaga whatsoever. And that is what a Parsha the Yid was in the Tkufa, in the era of Vayechi. What a Parsha the Yid was in the Tkufa of Vayechi. Yes, no, and Kal V'Chomer, Tkufa is Bayis Rishon. You understand? An era the Vilna Gaon couldn't imagine the presence of a human being, the chshivas, what the guy was. So I've said no other places. The Pshat is he was a person who embodied the presence of Hashem. When the Beis HaMikdash is existing, it only exists if the people are on the madrega of Ishachanti B'Seichel. That the person is an individual, that the Shekhinah is mamish residing within it. But I thought the Vilna Gaon was I have no musik, and we had no musik with the Chavetz Chaim, no musik with the Vilna Gaon is Shiur. And the Vilna Gaon said, "Hatish came musik when this." We're talking about a yid that you're in a time, a yid that gesagt Chedushim, Varashi, Gaon Eilam. Midayris Shabbat. Understand? Because everybody after that didn't have a shaykh to the Beis HaMikdash. These Olamos, they lived in a whole different plane, which we don't even know how to describe it. So the Vilna Gaon says that Churban Beis HaMikdash was the Shas Misa of Galus. That's what he says. Because Tzion was Beis Chayenu, and he says going out into Galus was mamish the Yerida Lekev. And the Amim, the nations of the world, what they did, they attacked our boss. They were like the worst. But we remained Aksaris. Those are the yeshivas had Galus, Talmidei Chacham, he says. And then those also got messed up. And then slowly, he says, and now we're holding by the third level. So if we are like Afar, you understand now, and you learn, and you hear something from the Tkufa, this is what this Ramban says over here. The Ramban over here says that we, v'anachnu boy, Ramban's writing his time, v'anachnu b'golos oras orach aleinu, v'anachnu boy, we are in this golos, Kimes Oimrim, we say, Yovshu Atzmoseinu. Our Atzomas became Yovish. That's already in the Kufa of the Basar was gone in time of the Ramban. And the Atzomas were holding by becoming Yovish. But the Skimar Atzomas, it's not how to give it up, it's Atzomas. And then the Atzomas themselves become off. This has to give us a shtickle understanding when people who have a shaykhis, who have a Hubble telescope, and they tell you how big the sun is, how big a star is. You say, wow, is it that big? One star is bigger than the whole sun, one star is bigger than the whole moon. How can it be a shaykh? You have almost a Hubble telescope, you can see this kind of things. You have to know that in our era, the Ma'isa of is similar bonim. In our era, we're living in a tremendous time period where the offer is mamish geferlich, and the Torah that we have today is not the Torah which they had then. And that's why the Navi says that in the era before Mashiach, there's going to be a tremendous hashpola, a tremendous humiliation, a tremendous looking down upon Talmidei Chacham. That's the Talmidei Chacham. That's the pu'ula of the Talmidei Chacham becoming offer. You live in a matzav today, in the era where there are so many people, nice people, fine Yidden, who don't understand, who don't grasp bichlal, that ein umaseinu uma ela b'Torah. They don't understand the chashivus of a ben Torah. They really think, finally Yidden do daven in shul, Yidden give stocker, Yidden are frum. They really view the ben Torah themselves as mamish gordish. They don't see any shilton. And it's like this in history. In history it always was, throughout history, any ruling class in Klal Yisroel was always made up of Talmidei Chacham. And it's only part of the Ikvas of the Mashiach where it became this hapach. That today the leaders of the Jewish people are the emissary Shoyim, Hakruya Mason. They're not even Afar. And people Parsha think they're the leaders of Klal Yisroel. This is the Pshat, Chutzpah Yaski. It's going to be his Gabrus of Chutzpah. And the way the Chutzpah, Shtolz Achoyz, that you get a guy who has no shaykhs kiyus that guy, and his klal. You had a guy maybe with a nice hairdo, and he becomes a ganzer macher in Yisroel because he was on TV. And now the guy becomes a spokesman for the Jewish people. And he says, Yesh Atid. He said, no, future. Makes a party calling the party of the future. Here's the party of the future. Because this guy is going to be moiled Tcheis HaMesim. Because he's the biggest mamous mashkas from Klal Yisroel. And this whole attack that they're making in Eretz Yisroel on the Bnei Torah. The whole fight between the Bnei Torah, who were never conscripted into Torah, into the army. They were allowed to sit and learn, and slowly but surely, the SHLITA of this HaRav is coming to be mevatel l'zach. And what's going now in Eretz Yisrael is geferlich. A little while ago, there was a rule that you had to go to the army, and it was numbers. It was going to be a tremendous gzeira. And now everybody thinks that the gzeira became bottom. And the Rebbe said it's geferlich. It's mamish pitu yayetzer HaRav. Because all they did is they said there won't be criminal sanctions. But all they did used to be a zach. If you were learning in yeshiva, you showed up in an office and they gave you a dichur. They said you're potter from going to the army. Today you don't get any pturim anymore. What you get is a dichur. They give you a delay. A delay. You could wait before you do your service for 8 years. And there's no such thing as pturim. And this whole tchun, this whole challenge, what they want, they don't need the Bnei Torah in the army. There's no missing Bnei Torah in the army. They don't want Bnei Torah in the army. Vosinas. This is all. So what happened? Now the new government came in, and now they made a heskem, and everybody says, gewaltig heskem. What's the heskem? Heskem is no criminal sanctions. You have to show up, and you have to know you're a conscript in the army, the Israeli army. The whole zach, the mevatel, the yeshivas, to get bachim, go to yeshivas, this is all the hashpola. What kind of people sit and learn? You have to carry the burden. Carry the burden. That's just in the chapi kursus daily mizoyis. The Gemara says that a guy who's devar Hashem boza is an apikoros. So the Gemara says, what's an apikoros? Parsha says in Sanhedrin. It's somebody who says, Maya Hani Le Rabbanon. What benefit did the Rabbanon do? What burden do they carry? All they do is Lididu Kari, Lididu Tani. They learn for themselves, they choose their own lifestyle, they withdraw from society, they have their own societies, they don't carry the burdens of society, and society has to carry their burden. The Gemara says that's not Bikairis, for whom you forfeit, you got to them out. Why is it Rashi? Heim Eiman Yoidin. They're not acknowledging that their whole kiyum, their whole schus, is coming alidei those kailnikis that are sitting and learning. Their whole schus, any atzloch that they have in startup companies, in having money from the American government, of other ways, are all attributed to the fact that it's a country with the most B'nai Torah and the most kailim over there. Now there are a lot of from here that don't believe it. A lot of from here. I remember coming at a time in my life, having to think about this, how to address this thing, why we don't go to the army. In the mice, I grew up thinking, you know what I mean? A guy who carries a gun, a guy who sits in the front, a guy who sleeps in a tent, out in the cold or out in the heat. That guy is doing for me. The guy who walks around and doing shmira. That's guy's carrying his burden. The guy goes to do, sneaks into the Arab neighborhoods at night to arrest people, or they go out on missions. These are people that are keeping the country alive. And the mice, the B'nai Torah, just, okay, it's a life choice, but they're sitting around. They're sitting around. And you think, Avigdor, I remember in the Vietnam War, when I was a kid, so if you were in yeshiva, you didn't have to go to the war. And literally, on every second block in New York, a yeshiva popped up. It was called Drev Daji Yeshivas. And every friar guy with long, I remember guys with long hair. And what happened was a lot of Alter Rabbanim made some nice money out of it. What they did is they opened up Bati Midrashim, home colleges. It didn't take much to do. Put a little shingle out in the door. I remember going down the street and singing on the door, Moisid this, Moisid that. What happened over there? And out of these doors, you go inside to look sometime, most of them no one was there. But there were people who used to come in and out, long hair, all of a sudden, call meaning, called Shiur from the Vel. They didn't want to go to yeshiva. So it became a massive of Drev Daji yeshivas. But a lot of people think it's a sentach. You don't want to learn Yisroel, so you're too lazy, so you sit and learn. It's the minig hamok. But we're not machshir in our own self. We're not margish that this is what's keeping the country alive. We don't look at a young man as another chashuv. We also get inculcated and educated that this is to us a parasite. Okay, he's not doing bad things, not a Schwarzer sits and a nice Schwarzer sits and eats watermelon on his stoop. You understand? Or he drinks his soda out of a paper bag. I mean, he's always swinging his soda from the bag. Yeah, people like that, late games. But Shiva, that's what you think. We have this, that's the offer, that's the hashpol of Talmidei Chacham. Yeah, of course, there are always exceptions, outstanding of the Chachamim. There was always what you call individuals that even the Balabatim wanted to have, an Abunim. Zabunim, a handful of Abunim, you have it stand out. Of a regular guy, go to work. Got a business, you sit and learn. Have a shikana. What kind of story is this? Don't be a lazy ferret. A lot of from you didn't believe it. You're not machshav with the Chacham. Told you a story of my mother. My mother was in a car, coming home from doing a chesed, went to visit some people in the hospital. A nice lady goes to the hospital, she's driving her home. And she was talking about how people in Lakewood are sitting around, their mom is eating up, everybody has to support them, and this and that. Well, that's what it's about. It's not better supporting the dead mom is keeping up Kaiser. That's our whole future. That's what mechanech our kids for. And my family mother said, our chinuch was, you bring your kids up to sit and learn. That's the greatest schus. How can you put down military? She says, I have some of those also in Lakewood. But they're sitting around, they're living off us. My mother said, stop the car, I want to get out. Stop this. You're miles away from your house. Stop the car. I'm going to walk home. I don't want to be another minute in the car like this. No, nice person. They're saying that. Saying it too. They're contributing to the Tchias HaMeis. They're making sure we're staying in a matzav of offering. They're being mashpul Talmud Chacham. That's what you have to know, is the matzav we live in today. We have to be mchazik ourselves to understand what's the ikr and what's the tafel. And just because the Chachamim are mushpolim doesn't mean that Klapi Shmaya Gali they are. That's just a plan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It should be like that to bring the Hisnari, may offer Kumi, to bring about the Geula. But Avada, we have to know the emes, and we have to know what the Geula is going to end up being. Like Yankov Avinu was taken out with great covet, great mourning, and great patanis. Someday, hopefully shortly, the Geula will come. We're going to go out of this Galus, and everybody's going to see the emes, everybody's going to chap the emes, and things are going to be restored to the way it was, that the Roshei Ha'am will be only the Talmidei Chachamim. Everybody in Am Yisroel will recognize that, and anybody has no shaykhis to Yahadus, who's not a Talmud Chacham, will be put back in his place. They'll come back to Afar, just because the guy has a big house or a big car, or make a difference to him, just like it didn't make a difference in history. Maybe he'll have a big mouth, that's all you're going to have. It's not going to help him, it's not going to help you, it's not going to help Klal Yisrael.